Good evening and welcome to another episode of Answering the Call. Today we're privileged to have a member of our community here in East Bridgewater, Bob DiFazio. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Bob, you were a Vietnam veteran that served in the United States Navy with the Seabees.
I did.
Very good. Well, how about growing up? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Quincy Point, right by the old Bethlehem Steel shipyard.
Okay.
And I was there all through high school. Great community, nice neighborhood. We had about everything that you kind of wish some of the kids today had. We had bowling alleys, we had drugstores, we had all kinds of things.
And where did you go to high school?
Went to high school at Quincy High School.
Okay. And what year did you graduate?
1964.
Okay, wow, 64. Now, during that time, I mean, did you have any jobs as a kid?
I did. I started out as a paper boy at a gas station. And the fellow that owned the gas station really became my mentor through most of my teenage years and my early adulthood. I started working for him when I was 12, cleaning tools and sweeping floors, and I ended up learning the trade. After high school, I went to Franklin Tech for automotive. So I was pretty well set when I was about 19, and Uncle came knocking on the door.
So what was that experience like? I mean, obviously 64, 65, in that era there, the country was starting to really kind of wake up to what was happening overseas. So
yeah,
what were your feelings at the time?
It was accelerating. And of course, we knew that the draft was knocking on the door. We had got our notice to go get our physicals. It was at the old Boston Army base, which is now down at the seaport. After my second physical, I saw that they had all the guys from the week before lined up, and the Marine Sergeant and Army Sergeant were there, and Army Sergeant was saying, "I'll take that one," and the Marine Sergeant was saying, "I'll take that one, and that one." And I said, "No, this is not for me." So I left. And of course, driving home to Quincy, I had to go down Wollaston Boulevard, and you come right by the Navy recruiter, and I zipped right in there and introduced myself, and I told them that the draft was knocking on the door, and they said, "Well, we have a new program. It's a 120-day delay. We'll swear you into Navy Reserve, 120 days, and you won't have to do anything. And then 120 days later, you would go to boot camp." So I said, "Well, what will I do?" And they said, "Well, what do you do for a living?" Told them I was an auto mechanic, and they said, "We'll put you in Naval Air, and we'll make you a jet mechanic." So it sounded pretty good to me. I mean, at least I had another 4 months to spend with who is my lovely wife for 51 years now. And everything was going to be fine. The week before I left for boot camp, the recruiter had called me up and he said, "Would you mind going in town and taking an exam, take a couple of tests?" I said, "Sure, no problem. I didn't have anything to do." And I took a CB construction mechanic exam and a petty officer exam for the Navy. So a couple of days later, he'd said, "Well, I got good news, bad news." I said, "Okay, give me all the news." He said, "Well, first of all, you passed your test." And it was an E5 test, which is a petty officer second class. He said, as a construction mechanic, you passed those exams. He said, "The bad news is you're already enlisted for 4 years. I could have given you 2 years if I had this program a month ago, but I don't. But the good news is I can give you 3 years instead of 4 years." So this was all starting to sound pretty good. So I said, "Fine, where are we going to go?" And he said, "Well," he said, "most of the guys are going to Rota, Spain. We have a big program going over there, and we do their support over there, and that's probably where you'll end up." I said, "Fine. So when do I go to boot camp?" And he said, "Well," he said, "you won't." He said, "You go to petty officer school at Davisville, Rhode Island," which now they have a CB museum down there. I think we talked about it earlier. And I said, "Gee, that sounds great. How many weeks?" He said, 8. I said, "Oh boy, that'll be great. I'll still be able to see my lovely." Okay? So anyway, we ended up there, and I'm waiting for my orders for Spain, and it was RVN. And I said, what does RVN mean? And they said, Republic of Vietnam. I said, well, okay. So I went and I was assigned to a battalion down at Gulfport, Mississippi. And then we deployed over to Vietnam. And because of my enlistment, I ended up doing 2 tours. And that was it.
Wow. Now, as far as, boot camp, because Davisville, I mean, maybe you can tell the people a little bit about the history of the Seabees, but really Rhode Island is where the Seabees kind of started.
Absolutely. They did in the United States. That's exactly where they started. Back in 1942, Bureau of Navdocs decided that we need to have construction people to go to remote islands. We need these remote islands for support, and there's nothing there. So they went and they recruited tradesmen, and they had to give them incentive. They couldn't just pull them in, and these were older fellas. We couldn't just pull them in and not give them pay. So they gave them rank, and they gave them pay, and they would send them to the remote islands, and they would build airstrips and housing for the people that were coming in. And basically, most of the training started at Davisville. Half of Davisville, the other half of Davisville is Quonset Point Naval Air Station. And the other side was Davisville, which was the CB Center. And that's where they did most of their training, and then they sent them off.
Wow. I mean, when you think back, and you mentioned January of '42, so this was directly in response to Pearl Harbor and us getting into the war. And I believe it was Rear Admiral Ben Muriel who was really the father of
He's the father of the Seabees.
Of the Seabees.
Yeah.
And to know at that time about the fighting that was going to take place, I mean, they're basically predicting the future, that they're going to places with no infrastructure.
That's right, absolutely nothing. And they did everything. I mean, they drilled the wells for water. They built the airstrips. When I was in, we had detachments that would go out to remote areas in Vietnam, basically do the same thing. We had a fleet of vehicles, we used to call them Tonka toys, and they were actually small dump trucks, small road graders, small bulldozers, and they would fly those in for the advance party, and they would make the way for the bigger equipment to come in, and then they would start building. We were always support for the Marines. We provided their housing. We basically provided all the necessary things that they needed while they were deployed.
And I mean, people have the idea of the Seabees building things, but you also were trained to fight.
Yeah.
And I'd like to just go back to what was your boot camp like? I mean, what was the training for you like?
Well, here's what they did. Where I was a petty officer, they basically gave us non-commissioned officers an education about what the Navy was all about, what our responsibilities were. But once they sent us down to Gulfport, which was a base that was opened, it had been mothballed after World War II, and then they opened it up because they saw the resurgence of Seabees. They were going to need places for them. They sent us to Camp Lejeune with the Marines. So we trained 6 to 8 weeks with the Marines. Proud to say that sometime we beat them in their own war games. But, our motto was always, we build, we fight. And you never went anywhere where you had to work your regular job during the day without your rifle, without your ammunition, without your flak jacket, without your helmet. Because at any given time when we were over in Vietnam, the siren would go, we'd either be under attack or we'd be support for one of the other groups. So we were always there side by side with the Marines. We always used to kid around and say the Marines were just Seabees with light duty, but we got along very well. And I'm kind of an advocate for the education of the Seabees because a lot of people never knew what they did. And basically, next to the SEALs, they are the other support group for the Navy. We never wore Navy uniforms. I think my first 3 weeks in school, we wore the dungarees that the sailors wore and the white hat. After that, it was all Marine uniforms all the time.
Now, were you given, was it general training? Because, like you said, when they went in with no
specialized.
It was specialized.
We had fellas that would do M60 machine guns,
okay.
M79 grenade launchers.
Okay.
mortars. We had mortar teams. We had basically the same combat teams that the Marines had. But they were also equipment operators, electricians, plumbers,
Okay.
you know.
So what was your specialized training?
I was a mechanic.
Okay.
And basically, because I advanced to a second class petty officer after I was in for 5 months, because that was the test that I had taken early on, I was basically a supervisor. I was a glorified service manager. At that time, and it was 1966, I was responsible for $3.5 million worth of equipment. Everything had to go through my office for ordering parts. The termination was a preventive maintenance and cost control office is what I ran. I had 5 people under me, and we basically ran the show for the whole, both shops. We had a heavy shop, we had an automotive shop. Automotive was anything under 10 ton, anything over 10 ton, which was also bulldozers and cranes and road graders and earth movers and that sort of thing. They were on that other shop, and basically we ran all the maintenance for that.
Okay, so you're in training, and this is 1966?
66.
Okay. How many different schools were you sent to? I mean, you said you were in Gulfport. Was there any other schools in the U.S. that you went to?
No, basically Davisville was the petty officer schools, and the rest of it was military training. And they ran us through, well, we did military training down in Mississippi also. We had to do everything that the Army and the Marines would do. We would go into the tear gas chambers. Anything that they did, we did. And we had to, because we were basically their support.
Wow. Okay, so then once you got done with your training, what happened then? I mean, where did you receive orders? Where did you go?
Well, I was assigned to a battalion down in Mississippi. In fact, when I got down there, they were just opening up the barracks. At that time, I was an E4. I ended up being the officer of the day one day, because I was the ranking officer there. But they were flying in. They were coming in pretty rapidly. And they opened that base, and we did our military training. The next town over in Biloxi was an Air Force base. And in between that was a large wooded area for bivouac. So we would do military training in there. And we would be in war games and that sort of thing. And basically, although they knew we were tradesmen, they wanted us also to be soldiers. We had to be able to defend what we were building, what we had. And because we were building all this support units for all the other combat personnel, we were always under attack. I mean, we would go and build a strip of road, and they'd go blow it up that night. Okay, we had, let's see, when we were in Da Nang, we had a rock crusher, asphalt plant, concrete plant. We made everything. I mean, we would take big boulders and they'd crush it down into gravel, and then they would put it in the asphalt plant. And of course, if you were not a good boy, they sent you to the asphalt plant, and your job was to break open 55-gallon drums of tar with an axe.
Wow.
And that's what we did.
Wow. And just so we get there, you left the Biloxi area. They fly you out to the West Coast, or where did you go to deploy to Vietnam?
Well, we took off right from Gulfport.
Okay.
Okay, we were supposed to fly to make a couple of hops and get over to Vietnam. I was on the first flight going, the last one to arrive. I was with their advance party. There was only 18 of us on the plane, and every time we took off, we had a problem. We either had a fuel leak, radar problem, a wheel bearing. We ended up taking 7 days to do a 2-day trip, and then we ended up in Da Nang. Some of those bases were already established, ours was. I remember when we first got there, for breakfast we were having cornflakes and grape Kool-Aid because there was no milk. Then they sent over some components for a milk combining plant. And we would combine powdered milk with whole milk, and then we were supplying that whole compound area, which was probably about 12 units. There were Marines, there were Army. We were supplying them with fresh milk. So then some of the guys that were plumbers, they called them utility men, decided, well, you know what? We have air conditioning. We can make an ice cream plant. We can make ice cream. So they experimented with it, and they built this plant that we were making ice cream for the whole area. So it was basically, if we didn't have it, we'd either build it or steal it or find it, one or the other. And we were probably one of the least regulated sections of the Navy, because most of the guys were older guys, and again, they were all tradesmen, and this was just a second job for them, you know. So it was a great experience, and I was fortunate that I was with the same unit for 2 tours. It was ironic because I didn't have to go on the first tour because my brother was over in Saigon. So just before I left, they had told me, they called me in and said, you don't have to go with the battalion. We'll put you in another battalion. You'd go 6 months from now. And I said, no, you know, I've trained with these guys for 4 or 5 months, and I'm going to go with them. Not knowing I was going to do a second one,
Right.
you know. But that was okay, because the second one was just as well. The unfortunate thing on the second one is we arrived the first night at Tet. And I don't know if anybody had read up on history of Tet. That was that better than 30 days and nights of real aggressive fighting from the North Vietnamese. And of course we landed, and as we were landing, they were blowing up the airstrip, and then we were right into our fighting holes. So we spent 30 days and nights not fixing cars or jeeps or trucks, or we were in the fighting hole support. So,
Just surviving. How about on your first tour? Was there anything going around the base? Was were you under attack at all? Or?
Our first tour, we were directly across the street from a prisoner of war camp, where all the Viet Cong were taken to. Basically, we were right next to the hospital, and basically we only had a few alerts. Our compound did come under attack, took some mortars, injured a few guys. We were fortunate it could have injured a lot more. It was a Sunday, late in the Sunday afternoon, and most of the guys were spread out. We weren't working. We used to work, we worked Sundays till 4 o'clock. So after 4 o'clock, the guys were just kind of lounging around, or they were watching a movie or whatever. So we weren't really clustered in our huts. And they were 10-man huts is what they were. And of course, some of the huts took hits, and some of the guys were in there. The fortunate for us, but not so much for the battalion that relieved us, the night after we left, the Viet Cong came up over the valley, and they did hand-to-hand with the battalion that had relieved us. And fortunately, that battalion overtook them, got them to the prison camp, but for the most part, it was not too bad.
Now, that was a naval base. Did they have air coming in, or was it a helicopter, a jet, or?
Oh, on our attack, it was all mortars and rockets.
Okay.
Yeah, the first night I saw a rocket attack, it was like something out of a comic book. Something you would just see these rockets fly right over your head. And you'd be standing there saying, you know, I really don't believe I'm seeing this. Of course, what had happened was we had a Marine Air Group was right across the street from us, and that's what they were aiming for.
Okay.
But if the rounds were shot, they ended up in our compound.
Okay.
So, but knock on wood, it was a good experience. They treated us well.
And what kind of equipment did you oversee? Because you said you were like the supply officer for that area, and
oh, you name it, we had it. If it had anything to do with we were doing road construction. So if it had anything to do with that, we had it. I remember one week, we got 24 transit mixes and cement mixes. And of course, everything had to come through the office. We had to ID them. We had to identify them. We had to put our logos on them, so that there was so much activity there. You had to know who owned what equipment. And we were, our battalion was 133, so it was a red diamond with a 133 was on all those vehicles in 4 different places. Because they came over from the States, we had to do preventive maintenance. We had to change the oil and, you know, check them all out, make sure everything was fine. I remembered they ended up putting them up in the equipment yard, which was really against what I wanted to do. And of course, that night, old Charlie decided he was going to make a few holes in some of those concrete mixes, and they all ended up in the steel shop the next day having patches put on them. But just a bad call by...
If I remember you telling me about that earlier, you had
We
wanted...
had scattered them throughout the compound because they were going to go out. They were going to go out in the field over the next day or two. And we figured, well, you know, we only needed 24 different places to put these and not worry about them, right? But they decided they wanted to take a nice battalion picture for the yearbook of these brand new transit mixes. And they put them all in one area up in the equipment yard. And of course, that's where Charlie went.
Yeah, made it a lot easier for them to hit.
Yeah.
Did you have much interaction with the civilian population?
We did. We were required to hire. I want to think the contingent that our battalion had was 150 civilians. And they were basically people that would come in and clean up the garage. I had a young lady that used to come in and clean my office every day. And it was tough because we were out basically in the outskirts of Vietnam. So we were in the farm area, and the people didn't have much money. They certainly didn't have much money at all. And so they had these jobs. The unfortunate thing is we always had to check them security-wise, because not knowing how they were vetted, sometimes they would find grenades under the officers' quarters, and they would take the pin out of a grenade and put masking tape around the spoon, so the real hot temperatures would eventually
Melt it.
So they had to do a sweep every day. But it was required. It was part of the deal that the government made with them, that we would hire so many civilians.
Wow.
So, and then our compound, the corner of our compound was a cemetery. And they had all these Buddhist temples and graves, and we had to allow the civilians to come in to be able to visit their people, you know, in their graves, yeah, that they had lost. And, you know, that was another security risk. We had duty every night where we had to be in our perimeter holes, our fighting holes, and we had towers. And the civilians, because there were hamlets and villages out behind us, they could only come by us during the day. If they came by at night, they had to make arrangements with our command post that they were coming by. And basically, if they came by and we didn't have a directive that they were coming by, they were fair game.
Wow.
You know?
How did the population treat you? I mean, I realize, you know, we were there, you know, fighting, but I would imagine that a lot of the work that you did improved the countryside.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, with some of the, especially roads.
Yeah,
because,
we did, it was Route 1.
Right.
Is what it was. And yeah, we did that whole thing. And it did improve it. But there again, where we were, it was water buffalo and cart. No cars, no, you know, for the civilians. Because again, it was the outskirts, it was the farmland. So eventually, like now, what we did over there really enhanced that country.
Did you trade it all with them as far as
Oh yeah.
chickens, eggs,
The
meat?
whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
You know, if you wanted to get your laundry done, you could get your laundry done. You could trade off Salem cigarettes, because they had no menthol cigarettes. Tide detergent that we could buy at our post exchange. They would do Listerine, you know, but you would trade it off to get your laundry done. Of course, the sad thing about it is if you were in an office like I was, a lot of times would have our own laundry, do our laundry. Of course, nothing was pressed or anything. But if you were doing something special and you wanted a set of fatigues that were starched, they used to use rice water
No kidding.
for the starch. And of course, that stuff didn't breathe. You know, it was tough. I remember when I met my wife, went over to see my wife, I was on R&R in Hawaii. We had to wear our dress whites. They were yellow, you know, from how they had starched them, you know. But yeah, actually, the civilians that were in that whole area, they were grateful that we were there, because they didn't really have to worry about the Viet Cong coming and getting their kids, coming to get the guys, the young adults. okay, because they wouldn't come near the areas where we were. The Viet Cong wouldn't, because they were afraid of getting captured. The only problem we had was you never knew who was who. You know, I don't know whether you're a Democrat or a Republican because you look like me. Well, we didn't know whether they were RVNs, which were the good guys, or whether they were Viet Cong because they all looked the same.
Wow.
So you didn't know what their political affliction was.
And it's basically like you said earlier, which is something, you know, I didn't know was, I mean, the deals, they were making agreements that you'd hire so many
Absolutely.
of them. So you had to keep your word, and, you know, but it put you guys in danger because it gave them an opportunity.
Yeah, because if they had 1 or 2 Viet Cong that infiltrated their ranks and they were coming in there to sweep the shop and stuff, you had no way of knowing. You know, but I'll tell you, the CB units, a bunch of great guys. Unfortunately, I read a thing the other day that 2/3 of the Vietnam veterans now have passed. So there's only about 1/3 of us left.
Right.
And of course, we were young. They like to pick the guys that were 18, 19 years old. They would send us into training and make us heroes, pump us all up, and we would go and do anything they wanted us to do. It doesn't seem to be that way today because they have all the older guys. And the guys they have today are professional soldiers. And I got to tell you, you know, you got to get those guys a lot of credit. They leave their homes, they leave their families, and they're out there doing what the government wants them to do.
But they basically leave their lives. They
Absolutely.
put them on hold. How long did your first tour last?
Well, if you did 12 months in Vietnam, you didn't have to go back. The wisdom of the Navy was to send us for 11 months and 2 weeks. That way, if we had to come back, they could send us again. So what they did is they would send us for 11 months, 2 weeks, send us back to Mississippi, spend a few weeks in Mississippi, send us to Camp Lejeune for 6 weeks for training, take us back to Camp Lejeune for a week or 2, then ship us all out again. So.
How about, okay, you're overseas. I mean, you're on duty, like you said, was it during the day, 8 to 4? Did you have to pull any watches at night?
We did 6 to 6.
Oh, 6 to 6.
6 to 6 every day, and then you did every other night you were on duty. And on duty would either comprise on whatever your classification was. If you were the duty driver, you were one of the duty drivers. Most of the time we were just in the fighting hall. We were 2 men. What they would do is one tower, 6 fighting holes, another tower, 6 fighting holes, all around the perimeter. They would have 2 rows of concertina wire, which is that barbed wire. And then on one of the sides of us, we had lights that we could flip on. And that's where you were every other night, from 6 to 6. Wow. 6 to 9. Well, it was actually like 7 because you had to go eat and relieve the people that were there during the day and whatnot. But yeah, it was quite an experience because I remember one time, one of our perimeters was right next to the junkyard. We actually had a junkyard there for all the old equipment. And some of those battalion designators were reflective, they were red. So the moon would travel over and you would see what looked like a cigarette because it was red.
Right.
And you'd swear there was somebody there.
Out there.
You know, and then 4 o'clock in the morning, your eyes start playing tricks on you, you know, and you were just depending on the guys in the tower.
Wow.
You know, because the guys in the tower would, they'd hit that siren if they had to.
We'll come back to this. We're going to take a break,
Sure.
our halfway break, and come back with Bob DiFazio and answering the call. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, Josh, do your stuff.
Okay, people, you know the drill. Canned foods only, guys.
Sometimes you gotta live what you believe up in your arms, 'cause that's where it starts. Right here with you and with me. One no world needs now is love.
Generosity, pass it on.
A little help from up above. Faith to me.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Maybe he's really focused.
Maybe he likes spinning the wheels.
Maybe he just loves trucks.
Preoccupation with objects is one early sign of autism. Learn the others today.
Quiet, please. Wait a sec. I'll take one. Oh, yeah. All right. All good. Take care. Way to go. Nice. Bring it on. Gotcha. I'm here for you. Oh, no. Please, please, please. I'm waiting. Interesting. Not buying it. Not fair. That's it. This conversation is over. Oh, brother.
Body language can tell you all sorts of things.
I'm having a stroke. I'm having a stroke.
Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time. Time to call 911 immediately. The sooner they get to the hospital, the sooner they'll get treatment. And that can make a remarkable difference in their recovery. Learn the body language, the sudden signs, and spot a stroke fast.
Good evening and welcome back to our second part with Bob DiFazio, East Bridgewater resident and Vietnam veteran and part of the Navy Seabees. Bob, I know in the first half we talked a little about you know, you growing up and then getting into the Navy and into the Seabees and your first deployment to Vietnam, but we were talking a little bit about some of the guard duty you were doing and some events that went on. And in the break, you talked a little bit about the first time hitting the alarm, if you'd like to tell our viewers that story.
Yeah, I remember said to the sergeant of the guard one night, how are we going to know an incoming from an outgoing round? Because we had a battery of 105 howitzers behind us that were sending illumination, and they were sending heat rounds over to the enemy. And he said to me, don't worry about it. You will know when it's incoming. Well, sure enough, one night we got an incoming, and I hit the siren. And at the same time when we decided that, well, basically you were supposed to stay up in the tower, but at that time, Charlie decided that he was going to start shooting down the sides of the tower. It was a 60-foot tower. And I said to my partner that were up there, I think it's time for us to leave. And I remember going down that ladder, and my feet weren't touching the rungs. And we got down to the bottom, and from that point on, I don't do heights.
Well, how high were the towers at
60
that point?
feet.
So you were basically a target sitting up
Oh,
there.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
So, but anyway, once we hit the siren, and then all our perimeter started firing back. And then we got support from the Marines with mortars coming back over. It kind of subsided that attack. Fortunate, you know, being in the right places at the right time. So, but I don't do heights.
No, I don't blame you.
No. So,
You talked about the mortars from the Marines. What was your relationship like with the Marines?
I got to tell you, you know, they were grateful that we were around. They would come in. I know on our compound, we had 10-man huts, and I was fortunate because we were non-commissioned officers. There was only 4 of us in ours. It was 10 people, and we used to keep 6 beds available for the Marines that came in off a patrol, and they would come in from the boonies from the backside of our compound, because our area was right by the far end of our camp. And they'd come in the back door, and we always had, we wore the same uniforms except the tops. You know, our tops were basically like theirs, but ours had a CB emblem on it, said U.S. Navy. We always kept shirts for them. They would stay with us for about a week. They could get a haircut. They wore our shirts so that they could go and get warm food and showers, and we basically gave them anything they needed, because when they came in, they were tough. They had been out there for 2 or 3 weeks with nothing, you know, absolutely nothing. So the only thing we never questioned is if 6 went out and 3 came back, we never asked about the other 3. That was just off limits. We never said a word. And we used to get a lot of the same guys come back all the time. And it was good for them, because they had a chance. They could go to the movie, they could go to our clubs. And I remember some of them were crazy. If we were on guard duty at the gate, they'd come in to use the club and would say to the Marines, okay, you got to disarm. instead of taking their clip out of their rifles, they just go, and they'd say, okay, we're unloaded now. But, you know, there were a bunch, you know, you felt bad for them because they were out there and basically they're living in the mud, eating sea rations, you know, and especially in the monsoon areas, you know.
I was going to ask you
Monsoons were tough.
about that. I mean, did you said you had asphalt, so you paved roads.
Yeah.
Okay, but what was the weather? I mean, you hear the term monsoon. What was it?
You would go about 6 weeks of monsoon, which heavy rains. I mean, you know, there'd be, I don't know, inch an hour. And I know we used to have to close our shop because we'd get 3 or 4 inches of rain, water, and it wouldn't drain off right away. So fortunately, sometime we'd have a little party. We'd cook some steaks and, you know, we'd go and borrow stuff from the commissary. And, you know, we'd have a little cookout and some beer and at least give the guys a break, you know, because we were working 6 days a week.
What did you do for entertainment?
Entertainment, we'd have, well, we'd get the USO shows would come over.
Would you ever get Bob Hope?
No, we did not. No, we did not. As a matter of fact, we had a troop come over for our CB birthday. And we had to deal with the Marines. When it was their birthday, we took all their security. So all their people, their security people from their base could enjoy themselves. And they did the same thing for us. And unfortunately, that was one of the nights that we got under attack. But we were always good with them, and they were always good to us. Because, boy, if we needed them, we wanted them.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they were the fighters. We were the builders, you know. I mean, we'd fight if we had to. But I still see them today. They see my hat if I'm at the VA, and they'd go, boy, I remember you guys. You know, we were in such and such a place. We didn't have any place to live. You guys came in a week, and you made us huts and brought us in all kinds of stuff. And
with some of the veterans I've talked to, they always said the same thing, especially the Marines. They knew to seek out where the CBs were for the showers and the best food. And,
absolutely.
And like you said, ice cream was very big.
Oh, yeah. If we didn't have it, we'd find it. I would steal it.
One of the things you mentioned, you had the Marine Air next to you.
Yeah.
And the monsoons must have wreaked havoc.
Oh, yeah.
With the flying. How did they contend with the mud for the runways? Was it all asphalt or?
Well, theirs were over at their compound.
Okay.
But when we put in a runway, they used what they call Matson matting. It was designed by this Navy chief who happened to be a steelworker, civilian, that came in during World War II. And they designed these mats that had holes in them, and they interlocked. And we would take a road grader, and we could level the dirt, and then we'd put this matting down. And because it was heavy steel and it had these holes in it, it would anchor in there, and they could run a plane right down it. And those were the initial starts of the runways, so that they could get the initial equipment in. So, but yeah, no, the wing, the air wing, they were all helicopters over there, the Marine Air Wing. And I remember I was taking one of them. We were going to R&R, my buddy and I. We were going to Tokyo, and we had to go down from Da Nang down to, I don't know, one of the other places, so that we could get our commercial aircraft over. And we took a helicopter down. And the two pilots were arguing because one of them said to them, today's my 21st birthday and I'm driving, and you're only 20. And I'm going, this is nice. So then we get in the helicopter, and there's two of their crew, two pilots, myself and my buddy. And the first thing one of the guys goes, pats me on the back, and he goes, see that machine gun there? That's yours. I said, what do you mean that's mine? We're going right by the mountain. They start firing at us. You're going to open up on them. I'm going, wait a minute. I'm supposed to be going on R&R. Fortunately, we didn't have any activity going down. So.
Wow. How often did you get R&R?
Once.
Once?
1 week.
Wow.
1 week. We went to Tokyo, my buddies and I. And they were all from this area. In fact, we still get in contact. I met them down in Mississippi. One lives in Freeport. Fall River. The other one lives in Brockton.
No kidding.
We still get together,
Wow.
you know. So, got a lot of history.
I guess so. But one of the things I wanted to ask you was when you enlisted, was any of your buddies go with you? I mean, no, you were all alone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I got that little card in the mail that said report for a physical. I'm going, whoops,
Okay.
you know.
And so these were buddies you met in the service?
Yeah. In fact, one of them, he was one of the guys, he's Purple Heart. He's one of them that got hurt in an attack. I met him in Mississippi. We went all through our deployment, the whole thing together, right until we both got out.
Wow.
So, and I see him probably once or twice a month now. He's a retired Brockton firefighter. Nice guy.
It's lifelong.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, we're at the end of your first deployment. They send you back to the States, and what they send you back, would you say, to Camp Lejeune?
Yeah, at first, well, I could go on leave. I was supposed to go to New York to be what they called a B school instructor for automotive. And I decided, I said to Peg, well, this is a good time to get married because I don't have to go back. You know, they're going to cut my orders. And the only thing they said, I had to go to Gulfport to get my orders. So we got married and we went on a honeymoon, went down to Mississippi. And sure enough, when I was getting my paperwork, it said, oh, guess what? RNV. You know, so
Sending you back.
we were going to go back, and I said, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. They said, no, we don't have anybody to fill your position. Because that job I had required a second-class petty officer, because I had some third class, and I had some what they called strikers. I had, E2s and 3s working for me. And I said, well, then I guess I have to. So I was down there with my wife for 10 days. Flew to Camp Lejeune for, 4 weeks, almost 5 weeks, and then came back for a couple more weeks and shipped her back here. We were living in Quincy at the time, and took off and went to the second deployment. Of course, that was when we landed when they were...
Started the Tet Offensive. That was like 1968, was that?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
68, February of 68.
So, I mean, you talked about Da Nang. Your second deployment, was it near where you were before or a totally different area?
No, it was further north.
Further north?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
near what province or what city? was it?
Fubai and Way.
Okay.
We were right at the line of Way and Fubai, so that the Tet Offensive was actually coming over into Fubai. So that's when we spent 30 days. 30 days in the hole.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not a very good welcome back.
You needed a shave and a shower after that.
Yeah, 30 days, yeah. Okay. So once those 30 days completed, what was your, what were you doing there at the time? What was your main, objective? Was it maintenance or was it building newer?
Oh, we were doing bridges that were blowing up. Still doing roads. We were the road battalion. And because that road went all the way from the DMZ all the way down, because we had detachments along the way.
How many men were working under you at that time to build those roads?
Our battalion was 800 guys. We had 800 people.
Did you provide your own security out there? Or
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the Marines that were getting, no?
No, we had our own security force. And you could volunteer for that. You could do 11-month deployment. I think you could do 4 months or 3 months in security if you wanted to, but I couldn't because of the position that I was in, because I had to be there daytime. Actually, I was designated as a daytime employee, or if you will, but I could work any time of the day that I wanted as long as I did what had to be done. So a lot of times when it was really hot, 112, 118 degrees, I'd work at night. And I'd just go in at night, and it was kind of a social call because all my buddies that used to be on the daytime were on the nighttime.
Yeah.
And as long as we got out and did what we had to do, and then the petty officer that was below me, I'd have him run the office during the day. When the Marines came and stayed at our huts, we would put signs on the bunks that said night shift. That way, if any of the officers came through and saw these guys sleeping, they wouldn't bother them. So,
Was it a big temperature swing between day and night?
yeah,
shift?
actually, you slept with a wool blanket, because you'd go from 110, 114 down around 74. There'd be that much of a drop at night. Wow. And of course, all those huts were all screened, so you'd feel a little chill.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow. So after the Tet Offensive, did you come under attack much during that?
No. Actually, we were lucky. We didn't. We were really fortunate that we didn't. Just that one time, when they were shot rounds, is what happened. They just were shot to Meg.
Wow.
But we were fortunate. We were in the right places. The Marines had a Mars station, which was the two-way radios.
Okay.
You could call home. And I met a sergeant one day, and I said, somebody had told me he ran the Mars station. I said, what's going on in the Mars station? I'd like to call my wife. He says, you're not going to do that for a while. I said, why? He said, they blew up our tower. So I said, what are they going to do about a tower? He said, nothing. So I went and I called a few people that I knew at the equipment office, and I said, hey, are you hauling telephone poles? They said, yeah. I said, I need a 60-footer. They said, for what? I said, I need it to be delivered at the Mars station. For what? I told them. I said, they don't have an antenna. I said, I can't put the calls through. So he said, okay, let me see what I can do. So then I called another equipment operator, and I said, how about a hole digger? You got any hole diggers around? He said, yeah, we're putting up some poles. I said, will you be able to put a pole down by the Mars station over at the Marine base, which was across the street? He said, who's going to sign my chief will sign it. And I was fortunate because the chief that I worked for, he was an E9, which is the highest enlisted person you could have. He had come off from submarine duty, and he had said to me, listen, he wanted to know if I knew what was going on in the office. I said, yeah. He said, just sign my name to anything you think I should know about. I said, okay. Well, that signature went on that pole. Okay, so they put that up. Sergeant said to me, do you know anything about the two-way radios and stuff? I said, yeah. He said, would you mind coming over on Thursday nights so that we can go to club night, him and his partner, and will you run the station? I said, sure, no problem. And I said, oh, here we go. Now I can call in all those favors, you know. So we used to radio to Hughes Aircraft, because he used to pay for the calls.
Howard Hughes?
From California to wherever you were calling, telephone calls. This is back in '66, so
yeah.
You know, a long distance call from California was a few bucks.
Yeah.
But we used to have to start at 6 at night. If we were lucky at 1 in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning, stateside time, you could get through. But we could usually only put less than a dozen calls through. And of course, the first call I put through was for my wife, and she lived with her sister, and her brother-in-law used to say, "Will you tell that crazy guy to stop calling at 2:30 in the morning?" You know. But then I'd put him through for the chief and the commanding officer and the whole thing.
Wow.
And we'd either go through Hughes Aircraft or we'd go through the Marine base at El Toro, California. And we used to do that every Thursday night for the guys.
You must have been a popular guy who did
Yeah,
that,
well, it was good because a lot of them, some of the calls we did were emergency calls. You know, unfortunately, some of the calls we did were the Dear John calls.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, the guy had received the Dear John, and but it was good. Yeah, I was very popular on Thursday nights. So, but it was good. It was great to be able to. You know, I was a newlywed.
Yeah.
And it was just great to keep in contact with my wife. You know.
Absolutely.
And of course, everything had to be, you know, like you say, well, when you coming home, and you'd have to say, well, 23 days past my father's birthday. You know, because that was the only thing. You couldn't give dates. You couldn't,
Yeah.
you know, that whole thing.
Wow.
And I remembered after my first tour, I was in Mississippi getting ready to go home and get married. We were supposed to get married on Columbus Day. That wasn't going to work because we weren't going to be back. So we planned Veterans Day, which was good because it's always a holiday. And the night before, the day before, they had a tornado over in Mississippi. So they said all mechanics, all equipment operators need to stay because we need you to run equipment. And if you were a mechanic, you had a license to cover, and you could drive anything, any of the pieces of equipment. So I remember I was on duty at the barracks, and I'm sitting, and there was a electrical box here with all the circuit breakers. And one of the lieutenants come in, and he says, it was a mechanics barracks. I need all the mechanics to fall out. We need them right away. So I'd be sitting there, and it'd say, are you a mechanic or an equipment operator? I go, no, sir, I'm an electrician. We got a circuit breaker that's off here. And he just left. Because we were taking a flight that night. I was getting married 2 days later, you know. So we weren't going to put that to chance.
Wow.
But I hate to be tooting my own horn, but, you know, they're pretty good stories. I was fortunate.
Yeah.
I had a lot of friends. I have 3 people on the wall that were friends now. And, you know, you look back at that whole war, and the sad thing is I find that a lot of the young people just don't know about it.
No.
And there was a lesson to be learned, and I'm not 100% sure that our people in the legislature and in government have learned that lesson yet. And you hate to see these guys go out and, you know, I give you that book to read. You got to read it. Tim O'Brien, for the people that have not seen his documentary that he did for public TV, it's a 7 series, 7 nights. He was quite a guy who was an objector of the war and finally went to fight. And he's got some stories about what these guys carried with them. Guys from all different phases of life that were out in the boonies with him. And it's a pretty good history about how it all started and how it all ended.
Yeah, and I've said this before. It's, you know, the people that were against the war that and protested, and looking back through history, rightfully so, but the actions against the soldiers who were just out there, you know, fighting for their country, it was sad the way, you know, you were treated. Were you aware when you were in country of what was going on, the protests back in the United
absolutely.
States?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Hanoi Jane.
Oh, yeah.
We were well aware of her. Yeah, and you know, the sad thing is, it didn't matter what the cause was. Whether you agreed or you didn't agree, you were called to fight for your country.
Right.
And that's what I think got really screwed up along the way with these protesters. That, again, you were against what was going on, but don't take it out on those guys. Those guys are doing their duty. They were called to do it. And the majority of them didn't agree to it, didn't agree with what it was all about. But you get called to do, and you know, the sad thing is I'm not sure whether that would happen today or not, whether they'd go.
Yeah,
Hard to say.
And the other thing is, I mean, somewhat World War I, but World War II and Korea was, you know, the newsreels and at the movies. But Vietnam was every night at 6 o'clock. I mean, I can remember, you know, sitting there watching Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley. You know, and it was brought into your living rooms. How about when you returned? How were you received back here at home?
Well, my wife was in my arms at Logan Airport, but I had come home. I remember coming home in between my deployments, and that's when we decided we were going to get married, and I was going up to the jeweler's building to buy her ring. And I had just flown in, and we had to fly in our dress blues, which I really wore. And we were walking up Washington Street, and they were actually spitting at me. They were just, you know, they were yelling. And I just couldn't believe it. I said, you got to be kidding me. And of course, you know, Peggy, my wife, she was saying, no, you know, just cool it, just let's just walk along and not create a hassle, because, you know, you spent 10 or 11 months over in a war zone like that. You come back a little belligerent, ready to get into a fisticuff if you had to.
Sure.
And she didn't want to see that. But yeah, it was, you know, and then learning what was going on, it was just, you know, it was a shame. And a lot of guys got broken because of that.
Yeah,
you know, they wanted to come back. They felt that they were kind of a hero for serving their country, and then they get spit on and yelled at and that sort of thing. So,
one thing I wanted to ask you too is, and although that's what you said is very important, but as we get closer to wrapping up, is you had such a specialized job, and if they were short, did they try to talk you out of leaving?
Oh yeah, they wanted me to extend. At the end, they offered me a promotion. I asked them where I was going to go, and of course, they couldn't send me to Vietnam again. I had done 2, but they wanted to send me to Turks and what is it?
Turks and Caicos there?
Yeah, Turks and Caicos.
I don't even know if I'm saying it right.
And I said, that'd be beautiful. We were married. We'll have a great opportunity. It'd be great. Of course, back then, all it was an airstrip and a couple of huts, a couple of garages. Couldn't take any military dependents.
So that meant your wife couldn't go?
No. My friend from Fall River took his wife, and unfortunately she became ill, and they were an English colony. Of course, they have social medicine there. They wouldn't take care of her at all.
Wow.
He waited 6 weeks to get a commercial flight to fly her back. So anyway, they sent us to California, and they didn't expect us to be there. It was just before Christmas. And so to give us something to do, they had us take a California Highway Patrol exam. And I came in the top 10%, so they offered me a job. And I called my wife and I said, how'd you like to live in California? She says, are you kidding? You get back here. I said, okay. So they called me in one night and they said, you come from Quincy. Is that anywhere near Boston? And I'm going, yeah. And they said, how would you like to be attached to the 1st Naval District headquarters on D Street in South Boston, and you'll be part of the Armed Forces Police Shore Patrol and work in the brig for the next 6 months. And I said, sounds good to me. So that's where I ended up.
Wow.
At the end.
So you actually
and they still asked me if I wanted to stay in.
Stay, yeah. Well, it's funny, you took the patrol job and you end up really in law enforcement with the Navy.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but, you know, knock on wood, it was a good career. It would have been a good stepping stone, but back then there were just so many troops that.
Right.
Now they've completely done a whole reevaluation of the Seabees, where the camp down in Gulfport is completely changed, and our next segment we'll go through that.
Wow.
It's quite amazing what they've done.
You had, you know, quite the career, and I look at you, you're saying you started at the garage at 12 years old, and you were right in the golden age of the automobiles, of the muscle cars and everything else, and it took you into a career, you know, with the Seabees that, you know, I mean, just really your experiences were incredible. And as we wrap up here, Bob, I want to thank you for your service, and I want to thank you for coming on our show tonight and telling the people of East Bridgewater your story. It's not, as I said earlier, it's not tooting your own horn, your experiences. I'm glad you came on and were able to tell us, and you know, we get a little bit of understanding of what you went through over there. So thank you very much.
You do a great job. You've done a great job with World War II. Now you're going on to the Vietnam segment, and really looking forward to seeing all those segments. It should be good.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
That'll wrap up our show for tonight. Once again, we've had Bob DiFazio, and we appreciate you watching. Have a good night.